straight up, this is a rematch that nobody asked for.
No one.
Unless you're Paul Craig, I guess. Matt, we have, I gotta say it with full transparency, the reason why we get into MMA was for Georges St. Pierre, Lyoto Machida, and Shogun Rua.
Yeah.
So let that be known right now. We have Shogun Rua taking on Paul the Bearjew Craig. And Matt, if it weren't for that nickname, Paul Craig's UFC career has been something.
Less than memorable, I'd say. It's really weird, too, because Paul Craig's a guy who, it seems like there is always a bit of hype around his fights, but no one really seems to know why. Now, that sounds a lot more disrespectful than I mean for it to, but Paul Craig, he's a good grappler. He has less than impressive striking, I'd say. He's very well known for pulling guard, though. And I was asking Craig what he thinks the average amount of times Paul Craig's going to pull guard and this fight's going to be. The over-under, I'm going to set it at 5.5. You can throw it in the comments.
I was going to say 4.5.
Fair enough. So Shogun, really, if he doesn't go into Paul Craig's guard, I do like his chances. And I know I'm getting, kind of prediction-y early, but this fight's very strange because it's one of the few fights where, yes, I've seen these two fight before, but I do think this fight could be completely different. I don't really think we learned that much from the first fight. Because what do I think is going to happen in this? Well, Shogun's chin's not great anymore, and he has... This is going to be controversial. He's got Thiago Santos black belt. I've seen Shogun Rua dominated on the ground too many times for me to keep on saying that he is a viable submission threat off of his back. Joe Rogan always used to say, oh, he's a black belt. You got to watch out for him.
One submission win his whole career.
There's a difference between being a black belt and being a true, legit, world-class black belt. Yes, a lot of MMA fighters have black belts. They don't use it, though. Tyron Woodley's a black belt, and so is Gilbert Burns. That tells you all you really need to know. There's kind of levels to this, like you had alluded to with Corey Anderson in an early episode. And for Shogun, I just don't really see his jiu-jitsu at being on the level of a Paul Craig. So even though Paul Craig probably isn't as credentialed as a grappler, his MMA grappling is far superior. We saw that in the first round of their fight. And that's one of the few things I think we can take from it. Paul Craig, when he's on top, he can do well. But that's really all we took from it.
And I mean, for Paul Craig, you look at it, former Bama light heavyweight champ, former Fight Star light heavyweight champ, has a win over Magomed Ankalaev. I mean, how crazy is that? And you look at his last 5 fights, and I mean, I gave him a little bit of a slight at the start, so here's the good. He has that weird win over Kendi Nzechukwu. That was a good one. Lost to Alonzo Menefield. That was the sloppiest fight I've ever seen. He threw the bad spinning attack. You had Menefield crashing forward. He finishes Craig. Then he has a win over Vinicius Moreira, no longer in the UFC, the draw against Shogun. And then he gets a win over Gadshimrat Antigulov in the most labored performance I've seen out of Gadshimrat Antigulov, which is easy to say because that's every performance by Russia's Gadshimrat Antigulov. So in this fight, I look at Shogun. His last 7 fights absolutely amaze me. Let's go last 5. He beat Jean Vellante, the body punch. He has a loss to Anthony Smith where he cried. Then he beats Tyson Pedro, where Tyson Pedro wonky knee after he was winning the fight. Then he loses the fight and gets finished. Then the draw. And then he has a split decision win over Little Dog. And Matt, that was a fight that I didn't need to see. It made me feel sad inside because, again, those are guys that when we get into MMA, they were at their peak powers. And it was just a shame to see that because that fight was underwhelming. For Shogun Rua, you look at the overall body of work, you look at the Pride wins, you look at the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship run, and it's amazing. And it's crazy that he's still doing it at 38 years old. But there is not a lot of tread left on the tire, and we're about to hydroplane in a lot of rain.
Yeah, okay. I know we normally give some pretty in-depth breakdowns on this channel, or I'd like to think that we do. I don't even know if we need one for this. Shogun's chin is worrying beyond belief, and that fight against Nogueira was not good on his part either, because Shogun, the one thing about his game, even as he got older, was Muay Thai is still quite good. If he does hit you, if he can string together combos, he can still have success in an MMA fight.
You saw it in the Tyson Pedro fight. It was a perfect example.
Exactly. He had hurt Pedro, and that was a really back and forth fight too, and that was something we hadn't seen from Shogun in a while. Him actually take damage, accept it, and then move forward and kind of do his own thing. So for Shogun, the key is you can't get clipped early. It's been an issue. The Anthony Smith fight's a good example. He gets hit, and then he's just never really in the fight from that moment on. Paul Craig, he's not a dangerous puncher or really, I wouldn't say a serious striking threat by any means, but he has good power. And anyone who weighs 205 pounds, well, anyone who weighed 205 pounds yesterday and rehydrated to an unknown amount definitely has more than enough power to pretty much knock anybody out. Paul Craig's punches aren't the fastest you're ever going to see, but if he lands, I do think he can hurt Shogun. Shogun's leg kicks are going to give Paul Craig problems throughout this fight. But when I ask myself, okay, who could make the improvements from their first fight and really improve upon that? Well, it's Paul Craig. I don't see Shogun making any drastic changes to his game. I don't see him getting better with age. He is not wine. If anything, he is fruit left in the sun. I think Paul Craig's got this one.
Man, I didn't like that. That was rude.
I know, and I feel bad saying it.
I want to say something. We look back at their first fight. It was a draw. I don't know if we let that one out of the bag, but it was a draw. Guilherme Bravo scored the first round at 10-8, which was the reason why it ended up as a draw, because you had it split. One judge 29-28 Rua, one judge 29-28 for Paul Craig. Everybody scored the first round for Paul Craig, and yeah, he definitely won that round. It's just whether or not you had it at 10-8 or a 10-9. The funky part about it is if you go in MMA decisions, out of the total amount of people that scored that fight, two of them, friend of the show, Drake Riggs, was one of the two, scored it for Paul Craig. An overwhelming majority scored that fight at 29-28 for Shogun, winning the last two rounds. So it all depends on how he scored the first one. If we look at the Tapology picks, Matt, out of 514 total votes, 75% going with Paul Craig, 43% saying by decision, 40% saying by submission. If we look at the total odds, Matt, Paul Craig opened a minus 182 favorite average on best fight odds. He's now at a minus 172. Slight amount of money coming in on Shogun Rua, open a plus 151. He's now at a plus 142. You tipped your hand. I'm also going the same way. I'm going with Scotland's Paul Craig.
Breaks my heart, though.
It does. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you're in this game. You try and look at it analytically. In this fight, again, we tipped our hand. We get into MMA for the guy on the left-hand side. Big Shogun, guys. It's tough, though. You have to look at it for the parts and pieces. Paul Craig in his last fight came out, got a win over Gad Shimrad and Antigulov, whose cardio is not great, but he's a finisher, and you have to be careful. He also dove into Paul Craig's guard, which you know Paul Craig is going to pull guard all the time. Shogun Rua has a lot higher fight IQ, but in his last fight against Little Nog, it was tough because his cardio abandoned him. Paul Craig isn't a cardio king, but I like the staying power. We saw it in his fight against Magomed Ankalaev, what he can do incredibly late. So I will side with you on Paul Craig, Matt. We're both going Craig. Craig's going Craig. And I'm looking forward to this card, Matt. We've got some really good fights. This one, a hint of nostalgia, and also a hint of rematch. So things are going to happen. Two great flyweight title fights near the top. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say,
let's get into it.